Welcome to West Coast to East Coast, your podcast on the latest news in Canadian immigration and the latest tips on the IELTS, CELPIP, and PTE language proficiency tests. My name is Maria, and I'm a certified Canadian English teacher and language exam expert here to help you get the band scores you need.
And my name is Olena Weber, and I'm regulated Canadian immigration consultant. And today we're talking about IELTS and CELPIP and what is the difference between those.
Woo-hoo! Oh my, this is going to be a saucy episode because I get asked this question: which test is easier? Which test should I take?
I think we both do get asked this. Yeah, like lots of people ask me during immigration consultations as well, because obviously IELTS and CELPIP are the most popular exams to take for immigration purposes. But in the beginning of 2024, Immigration Canada also authorized PTE.
Yes, which we will talk about in a later episode. So don't you worry, we will not leave that out.
Yes. Okay, before we move on to that, let's talk about some recent immigration news that happened in the last bit since our last episode. There's nothing much really has been happening. One thing that is interesting is that Ontario provincial program has been conducting a lot of draws and inviting a lot of applicants. Ontario PNP program has been, in my opinion, one of the most promising programs for immigration this year. So yeah, it's been like really, really good. We had about 10,000 invitations issued in the last several months, and that's only in Ontario, right? Like Ontario PNP. So it's been really, really promising. And it's kind of like a silver lining among all the doom and gloom news that we've been having in Canadian immigration. Another thing what happened is that it happens really every year that IRCC increases the fees for permanent resident applicants. So every year on April 30th, IRCC increases the fees for, application processing fees. So if you do want to apply for permanent residency and you have an invitation to apply, it just makes sense to apply before April 30th because it's going to be cheaper if you apply before April 30th.
So things are getting more expensive.
Always, yes. Every year it's getting right. Yes, unfortunately. And then another piece of news is that everybody keeps speculating about the domestic express entry draws, and it's because Minister of Immigration said that they are intending to do what he called domestic draws, and everybody's kind of speculating that that would be Canadian experience class express entry draws. Basically, what they are hoping to do, they're hoping to give a little bit more of a priority for applicants who are inside Canada to apply for permanent residency versus applicants outside of Canada, because they understand that they need to transition or at least give an opportunity to transition from temporary to permanent residence if you are inside Canada. So that's also silver lining kind of news. And we're hoping just to see CC draws or any sort of domestic draws in the next couple of months. So yeah, hopefully it's going to happen.
That's great. Have you seen anything, any of your clients getting called as of lately?
No, nothing really has been happening yet. It was just kind of, like a bone that they threw to us, and it's just there. And like everybody's like, okay, what's going to happen next? We don't know yet, but nothing has happened. So there were no domestic draws, like no CC draws, like nothing, like virtually nothing has happened. Like they kept inviting French speakers. So the last week they again invited French-speaking candidates. Mm-hmm. So we didn't see like any specific domestic draws yet. But to be honest with you, I really think it's going to happen in the next several months.
Okay, so tip would be then to keep, if you are studying French, to improve your French for any of those future opportunities.
Yeah, definitely improve your French. And then if you have low scores, if you don't have French, and even if you think that you don't need to be an Express Entry profile, that's not true. Everybody, even with applicants with extremely low scores, everybody needs to be an Express Entry profile, just because you need to maximize your opportunities. You need to be in the pool.
Yes.
So if anything happens, you get picked.
Yes, remember that everything is so unpredictable. Even the regulated Canadian immigration consultants, like our trustworthy Olena here, we don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that your profile is up to date, that your language proficiency tests are also valid. Remember that your tests are only valid for 2 years. So make sure that your test is up to date. Sometimes candidates took their test 3 years ago and they think that their profile is valid in the Express Entry pool. If your test has expired, your profile is also not valid anymore in Express Entry. So
yes, also,
yeah,
very good point is that about expiration dates, what people don't really realize is that your test has to be valid at the day that you receive your invitation to apply, but also at the day when you submit your application. So you are given 60 days to submit your Express Entry application. So if your IELTS expires anywhere between those 60 days, that's not good. Like you need to make sure that you have a pretty long period of time until your IELTS or CELPIP expires, just so you're able not only receive your invitation to apply, but also submit your application within that.
Exactly. So give yourselves that buffer. So speaking of these tests, let's consider today's podcast episode as part 1, because today we're going to talk about the IELTS versus the CELPIP. And the next session and next episode, we are going to compare IELTS and CELPIP to the PTE, because it's a lot that we'd have to cover. And I think in one episode, it would just be a little bit overwhelming. So let's start with the IELTS compared to the CELPIP. Now, I've been working with these tests for over a decade, and I get asked the same question every single day. Which test should I take? And more specifically, people ask, which test is easier? So I know you probably want to know the answer right away. I'll let you know that none of these tests are really easier than the other necessarily. It's more about the test format and which test format you adapt better to. Now, I will get more into detail about the assessment criteria today, because I've also have a lot of experience working as an examiner for many different types of English proficiency tests. And I'll explain a little bit about the differences between each of them, and I'll give you my personal experience. However, somebody else might disagree with me, and you might have a different experience as well. So take everything with a grain of salt. And at the end of the day, I encourage you to try some of the free practice tests that you'll find on the official websites. Don't go on YouTube or anything. Always go to the official sources. So let's go test section by test section, so you can understand the differences between the test format. Now, the IELTS and the CELPIP test, the listening section. Most people find the IELTS listening section much harder than the CELPIP listening test section. Now, there are a few reasons why. The IELTS listening test includes multiple accents. So you're going to hear accents from all over the world, British, North American, and Australian. Whereas the CELPIP listening test is exclusively Canadian. And that's because the CELPIP test is a Canadian English language proficiency test. And most people find the Canadian accent to be really easy to understand. It's fairly neutral, right?
It is totally true. Like a Canadian accent is so much easier to understand. Like my husband, Corey, is Canadian, and he always likes to say that like Canadians don't have an accent. That's just English. Yeah. That's how English is supposed to sound.
Well, I mean, especially if you already live in Canada, that's the accent that you're used to hearing. So suddenly if you go to a language test and you have to hear an Australian accent or a British accent, if you're learning a language, it might be hard, right? I mean, I still, as an English teacher, encourage you to be listening to different resources to get used to listening to different accents. That's just good in general for your English proficiency. But for the test, if you just have to get it out of the way, I think the CELPIP listening test is easier, my opinion. Yeah. There are a couple of things, though, I do want to mention just to go into detail. The IELTS listening test does have spell check. So the CELPIP listening test has a drop-down menu. It gives you, it's a computer test. The IELTS is also on a computer. But the IELTS listening test actually asks you to type in the response. So you don't have the option of having a drop-down menu, whereas the CELPIP gives you the option. So you don't have to type in the response. The IELTS does. So spelling actually counts on the IELTS test, whereas spelling does not on the CELPIP. So you're more likely to make mistakes on the IELTS test than the CELPIP test. The CELPIP gives you the option to at least make a guess if you don't know the answer, whereas the IELTS, if you don't know the answer, if you didn't get it, you don't get the point.
Yeah, it's still in multiple choice. There's still a chance, like 25%, right? That
Yeah, you can get it, right?
And I know I've been in those situations when, like, literally listening tests. That was why I didn't get like the full mark in IELTS, because the last question I needed to write, and it was New Zealand accent, as later on somebody told me, and for the death of me, I couldn't understand like the word.
Exactly.
I just couldn't understand it. But I know for a fact that if it was multiple choice, I would have made sense.
You would have made some sort of sense out of it. Yeah. Now, the only part that I find more challenging on the CELPIP listening test is that the CELPIP listening does not let you read the questions before you listen to the audio passage. I find that a bit more challenging because you do have to take very organized notes as you listen from top to bottom. The IELTS is the other way around. They do give you 60 seconds to read the questions before you listen, and that gives you 1 minute to process and prepare your mind to understand what the key words are, what you have to listen for. So the IELTS does give you that 1 minute. So final point here, I think this CELPIP listening test is easier, okay? Let's move on to the reading. I think they are fairly similar, okay? So they're fairly similar in terms of difficulty level. Oh, last point about the listening I forgot to mention. The listening test on the IELTS is it's shorter than the CELPIP, but still, I think the CELPIP is easier. Okay, so back to the reading. The reading test, I think they're fairly similar. They're both the same length, 1 hour. The CELPIP does have 6 tasks, 4 are scored. The IELTS has 3 texts. In terms of the actual content, the English itself, it's fairly much the same. Like the English itself doesn't change. But going back to what you and I were just talking about, the spell check, the drop-down menu, I do think the CELPIP has an advantage there, because on the IELTS, you don't have the multiple choice option where you have the drop-down. So I do think the CELPIP has a little bit more of an advantage. So again, I do think the CELPIP is a little bit easier on the reading. So again, CELPIP for the win there on the reading.
Yeah, I agree. Like, I mean, I've taken both several times, and yeah, I agree that reading in CELPIP is just easier for me. Also, reading, just the level of texts was easier in CELPIP. I don't know why, but the topics. Okay, let's put it this way: the topics in CELPIP.
Okay.
Where they seem to be just easier to understand, those topics, than like IELTS. IELTS, it seemed like the topics were like way too odd.
Okay. Yeah. The CELPIP test is a Canadian test, so they use more. They use Canadian themes and topics, more about Canadian culture. Yeah. As opposed to the IELTS, which is an international English language testing system test. It's an international test. So the topics and themes will be a little bit more grandiose, bigger, something that's more worldwide. So they can be a little bit more challenging. So again, we have the winner CELPIP for 2 sections so far. Now let's move on to the speaking. This is the part where I think the IELTS does win, in my personal opinion. The speaking test on the IELTS is held in person with an examiner, regardless if it's the computerized test or the paper version. And I personally find that it's better to do a speaking test in person with an examiner because it's more conversational, it's more natural, and you don't have to be creative with your ideas. There are 3 parts to the IELTS speaking test. The first part, the examiner is just going to ask you some questions about your hobbies, about who you are, about where you live, about things you like to do, just some very simple, natural questions. Then part 2 is a 2-minute question where you have to speak for 2 minutes about something about you again. It might be about your past. It might be about a trip that you have gone on. But again, it's something that you're going to remember or something about your opinion, but it's something that you don't have to be too creative about because it's something intrinsic about you or something about you already know. Then part 3 is going to be an analytical discussion or a conversation with your examiner about the same topic in part 2. So they're going to ask you for your opinion, projections about the future, advantages or disadvantages about the same topic in part 2. Now, they will not ask you to describe a picture or any of that like in the CELPIP test. And you're alone in a room. It's just you and the examiner, and you don't have to worry about a timer. I feel like it's a much more natural conversation, and as a result, students perform better on the IELTS speaking test. The CELPIP test is on the computer, and you are speaking with the computer for 8 speaking tasks, and you are in a test environment it's a room with other candidates. So while you are speaking on the computer, other test candidates will be doing a different part of the test. They might be speaking, they might be typing. And within those 8 speaking tasks, you might have to give advice, you might have to give your opinion, you might have to describe a picture, you might have to persuade somebody to do something, but you will always have to be very creative and think on the spot. You also have to speak with a timer. So you'll have 30 seconds to prepare, 60 seconds to speak. So it's very fast paced. It's not a very natural English test, in my opinion. While the test designers did their best to make it as realistic as possible, because at the end of the day in real life, we don't get 60 seconds to stop and think about what we're going to say. Like nobody stands there and waits 60 seconds for you to think about what you're going to say, right? So in essence, it is kind of a realistic English test, but still it's not natural to speak with a computer with these timers. So a lot of students kind of freeze or get nervous, or they have a hard time thinking of ideas.
Yeah, but also I think, what you mentioned that if somebody beside you is having a speaking test and you may be still like on whatever, like the previous part, right? That can interrupt whatever you're doing, or if you guys are doing at the same time, because I literally just had a consultation today with somebody who had CELPIP like 7 across like 3 sections. And she's like, I swear I can score 9. It's just like, it was such a like really bad luck, because she's like, I was sitting by like right next to the guy who was like so loud speaking, and so just like disrupting me so much that she's like, I just really, really failed the whole thing. Because yeah, it's just luck, like, and maybe again, like another thing, what it can be is that if it's an older person who is doing these tests, and like my mom at 65 years old, she's not super proficient with technology, right? So you get really nervous about speaking to a microphone, right? Because it's not something that you do on a daily basis. Or you may like just get nervous, like, oh, did I push the button right? Or you know what I mean? So that also like brings that nervousness. And especially like when it's speaking part, it's all about your performance speaking. And if you're nervous, you may just like really fail it. And that being said, Maria, is that I have seen a lot of people that were, believe it or not, but much more comfortable with speaking part in CELPIP, because particularly IT guys, it's like a whole segment of clientele, because IT is such a targeted sector in terms of immigration. we do have a lot of, IT specialists who all they do literally all day long is just they sit on a computer with a microphone and they half of the day attend the calls and they speak with it. So for them, it's such a natural environment on the CELPIP speaking test. And for them, it's actually harder to converse with a person because then they get nervous, and like talking to a computer with a microphone for them is like no problem, right? So it is very individual kind of thing.
Exactly. And that's what I said at the beginning. It's not that one test is easier than the other. It's about the test format and which one you prefer. So what I'm saying here might not apply to you. And that's why I always encourage everybody to really try which one's best for you. And like the CELPIP speaking test, like what I mentioned is the test developers, the concept behind it does ring true, because if you are in real life, nobody's going to ask you a question and say, oh, do you want a coffee? And then give you 90 seconds to think about it. In real life, you still only have a couple of seconds to really think about what you're going to say. So it's still kind of, it is a realistic way of testing your English. It's just that you have to do it on a computer. You don't have much time to prepare for a reason, because in real life, we don't have tons of time to think about what we're going to say. And same with the listening test. We only get to listen once, because when we're in real life and we're listening to the radio, or we don't get to call the radio and go, can you play what you just said again? I didn't understand. No, that's not how things work. We only get one try to listen to things. Maybe on TV we can rewind, but when we're listening to people having a conversation, we can't really ask them to go back and repeat exactly what they said, how they said it. Okay, so we talked about the speaking, we talked about the pros and cons. My opinion is IELTS, but again, there are pros and cons to both, so you make your personal decision there. Now, the writing, it's fairly similar, but there are some minor differences. Task 1 is exactly the same. For general training IELTS and the CELPIP test, you have to write an email to somebody. They both have the same word count. It's 150 words. Keep in mind on the IELTS test, they really don't count the words. The examiner is not going to sit there and count the words. Don't worry about that. And on the CELPIP test, they have the word count machine on the machine for you there. So you don't worry about that. Same thing for task 1. What is different is task 2. On the IELTS test, you will have to write a prose essay, meaning a 5-paragraph essay, or like an introduction. I mean, you could do 4 or 5 paragraphs. I teach 4, so introduction, 2 body paragraphs, and a conclusion. That's more than enough. I wouldn't do more than that, but it's an academic style essay versus the CELPIP. You don't have to do any academic style writing. It's a survey response. You can just do a small introduction, 2 body paragraphs, and a closing sentence. So there's no academic style writing to the CELPIP test. So I think the CELPIP writing is a little bit easier in that sense. The survey response is also shorter. It's 150 to 200 words. Now the writing, I would say the CELPIP in terms of the format is a little bit easier. But in my personal opinion, I find that the IELTS writing examiners are a little bit more consistent with their assessments. The reason for this is with the performance standards, how they rate you, there is one little bullet point that I find fascinating in the CELPIP rating for both the speaking and the writing that is not in the IELTS assessment criteria. And that is that on the CELPIP test, the examiners can determine your band score based on the quality of your ideas. In other words, whether or not they liked your ideas. The IELTS examiner cannot determine your band score whether or not they liked your ideas, the quality of your ideas. Now, on the IELTS test, only one examiner determines your speaking test result, and only one examiner determines your final writing test result. On the CELPIP test, multiple examiners determine your speaking test result, and multiple examiners determine your final writing test result. So you'll have about 2 or 3 people listen to your speaking test and 2 or 3 people read your writing test. So you have many people give a final assessment, so it's fair. just make sure that your ideas are relevant, on topic, and that they're strong, that they make sense.
Mm-hmm.
But it has to just make sense. It has to have meaning and make sense. So yeah, those are my final points. At the end of the day, my opinion has shifted over the years. I used to think the IELTS was easier. I'm leaning more towards the CELPIP nowadays. So either way, it's a win. You just have to make the choice as to which format you prefer.
Exactly. I think, like, based on my experience just working with immigrants, I do find that, like, just statistically, what I see is that statistically people tend to score better in CELPIP. That's just my experience. But at the same time, what I also see is that because IELTS has been so popular, like in the prior years, most of the students that came to Canada to study, they've taken IELTS before. So most of people, they've taken IELTS before just for academic purposes,
right,
and to enroll into the college or university. And because they already had that experience, they feel more comfortable with the exam. So for them, it's just like psychologically easier to study again for IELTS for immigration purposes, because they already know how it goes. They already taken it. They already know their score that was there, like, say 2 or 3 years ago, before they were coming to Canada. So a lot of them, they would choose IELTS just because they're familiar with the format. They already studied for it, right? So all they need to do is just build up on the base that they already built. When CELPIP, they feel like it's like shifting to a new exam. So it's that's trade-off, that like whether you want to, because it's still studying for those two exams, even though the concept is the same, but the studying would be a little bit different, right? Because
if you've already done the academic training IELTS, studying for the general training IELTS will be easier, because the vocabulary on the reading test is going to be easier. The listening test will be the same. The speaking test will be the same. And then the writing test is going to be easier, because academic training writing task 1 is harder. So the general training writing is going to be a piece of cake. And then the task 2 writing, it's the same concept, but the questions are going to be a little bit easier. Now for task 2 writing, the task 2 writing on the general training IELTS, we do go a little bit more into detail in our lessons, because there are 5 different types of questions that you can get. There's only one that you'll get, but you might get 5 different types of question types on the test. So in our test preparation classes, we cover the 5 different types of questions and how to prepare for each of them, because you will have to write a different essay style to meet the different criteria for each question. So when you're preparing for the IELTS for task 2, it is a little bit more detailed than the CELPIP. So when people come to us and they ask, which one should I take? I also take into consideration how much time they have, because the writing preparation is longer for the IELTS than the CELPIP, because the survey response, I can teach it in maybe 2 or 3 classes, but the IELTS writing task 2, I'm going to need at least 6 classes, because there's quite a lot to it.
Wow, that's crazy. I didn't know that. I thought it was more similar, to be honest.
No, there's quite a lot more. There's a lot more to it. The writing task 2 for IELTS it's not that it's that much harder. Like if it's not necessarily harder. It's just different. You just have to learn the different test formats, but I need more time to teach it to you. So once you learn it, you can go and just go boom, boom, boom and do it. But you will have to understand the different test formats. So I do think that the CELPIP's a little bit easier in that sense. Although I do think the assessment criteria is a little bit less consistent. So that's why I would say CELPIP myself as well, just to save you time and energy to go give it a shot. But if you have done the IELTS already in the past, stick with the IELTS, because then you're going to have to switch and learn a whole new test. And that's going to take up a lot of time.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's that decision, right, to be made. But I do see right now more and more people switching to CELPIP, and they're trying CELPIP more. So it is kind of like cool to see the comparison, because I see, like, during my consultations is that here's my IELTS certificate and here's my CELPIP certificate, right?
Yeah.
And I can see that comparison.
Yeah, there are some things that the CELPIP is very specific about. Like they like very specific, precise details with your vocabulary. Like they want very specific, precise examples and stuff. And there are things I like teaching in my class just to be different between the two. So if somebody wants to like really make a specific decision, they can also reach out to me and I can help them make that decision. If you want to make the switch as well, let me know and I can help you make the decision. But ultimately, I would recommend doing some practice tests. Go on like the British Council website or IELTS.org or official CELPIP.ca website. There are two free practice tests on the CELPIP website. Practice the free tests and see which one you like better before you go and spend $300, right? And do the test and see which one you actually like better.
Yeah, exactly. Those free practice tests are great. And I've done them myself and they really give you like a little bit of a taste of the difference.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then next week, what we can do is we'll compare, now that we've done an overview of the IELTS and CELPIP, this was a really in-depth breakdown of the different sections. We'll compare them to the PTE because the PTE is a whole different monster. You're going to see
I'm looking forward to it because I know nothing about PTE, like literally nothing other than the fact that it's assessed by artificial intelligence. I know nothing, so I'm excited about it.
The PTE is very strange. Like you have to write in different sections and it's just they're speaking and writing mixed together. It's a very unique test. It's nothing like the IELTS or the CELPIP. That's why if I all at once, it would have been too much. So I hope that this has been a helpful breakdown for you to make a decision between those two tests. And next week, we'll compare these ones to the PTE. But if you do need help with any of these two tests, get in touch with our team at English for Canada. We are a team of certified Canadian English and French teachers, certified CELPIP instructors, certified IELTS instructors. We are a CELPIP network school, meaning we are Paragon certified to teach and prep for the CELPIP test as well. We're here to help you get that Canadian PR.
Awesome. Okay, Maria. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for this in-depth explanation. And I'm looking forward to the next episode next week.
Yeah, thanks, Olena. And also, if you need help, contact Olena because Olena can help you in your plan as well. We'll see you all next week.
See you next week. Bye.
Bye.